guys. Thank you for joining ACE Your Health podcast. My name is Dr. Choksi. This is Aaron Hanley.
Hello.
We are here at ACE Integrative Health in Mason, Ohio. Thank you so much for your presence. This is our weekly podcast. Sometimes we upload a couple times more, but today we're going to continue our talk on soil. So we discussed a few things about soil and different types of soils and what kind of soils are available maybe in different zones and what you can think about. Sometimes we need different soils to plant different things. But as we go into the winter months, if you're taking up this opportunity to dive into learning more about gardening, planting, then we have to look a little bit farther out into the next year, into the spring. And in order to be very well equipped for spring, we have to plant something right now. And that's the soil, right? This is where you're going to be planting, and this is what you're going to be using to grow your different plants. But there's a little bit of preparation that goes on, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you so much for joining us. We have enjoyed a lot. So shall we get started?
Let's get started.
Okay, what do we have here?
Okay, so it's a little show and tell today, and I'm about as excited about soil as I am actual plants. So this is going to be great. And again, this is something you want to be thinking about right now. Try to get it in by the end of the year, ideally. The more time that soil has to break down, the better off you're going to be come March, April, May, during the real planting season. I wanted to just briefly tie in a few things from our last class, which had to do with the soil samples that we brought in.
What is that?
So this here is a clay-based soil. And you can see that how just dry and clumpy and hard and just not friable, airy type of soil this is. This is not what you want to grow your plants in. It's probably going to end up strangling the roots. So this is a no-no, but this gives you an example of what clay soil would look like. It's going to clump in your hand and it'll stay clumped. It's not going to break apart easily. All right, so there's clay. This is an example of silt soil. I don't have any silt soil at home.
It sounds like silk.
It sounds like silk, and interestingly enough, it kind of feels like silk. This is actually just regular flour that we took out of the house, but it gives you the texture of what a silty soil would feel like. So while
what is it made up of?
So silt is really just minerals. There's not a lot of there isn't a whole lot of moisture in this. Although even if this were wet, you can see it's still too thin. It's not going to bind. There really aren't any binding particles in this type of soil. So that is not sufficient. This is sandy soil, and you can tell because it's very, very gritty. And it also is very loose and wants to fall apart easily in your hand. So, too sandy of a soil is also not ideal.
Let me take a picture of this. So we have
clay, silt, and sand.
All right.
And then this final version here, this is really what you want. This soil, when moistened, will form a clump in your hand and will not easily fall apart. It's a little bit dry right now, but we've got some examples of what your soil is going to look like at the end of this process. I'm going to talk just a little bit about loam because we're kind of right there. If you were to combine all of these soil types in a nice balance, and actually I would say probably more sand, more silt, and less clay, you would end up with something called loam. Loam just means it's a happy balance of these three types of soils.
The question that keeps coming up to me is, what's the difference between this loam and the silt and all of these things compared to dirt or what we have outside, right? Like, can I just dig it up and start planting stuff?
So I would call this a form of dirt. because nothing's been done to it, right? It's just where somebody extracted some dirt from the ground.
So
This
like mud
is a
dried up.
form of dirt. Anything that you dig up anywhere is considered just plain old dirt.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to do is build soil, and soil is alive. In fact, in a teaspoon of healthy soil, you can get almost like 50 million microorganisms. So it's very, very much alive. And you can see the aliveness. I mean, you should be able to see earthworms and other critters in the soil itself, and then you know you've done it right.
That's so interesting. And this is a combination of all of them.
Correct.
Okay.
And you can feel it in
That's pretty
texture.
cool.
It should feel cakey in your hands.
That is really cool. What is this called?
All right, so what I've done is just imagine with me for a moment that this is maybe a 4x6 raised bed. Okay, we got a little mini version. Obviously, you would not have a bottom to this. You would not want to put this right on the ground because then it would have nothing to drain. So you want to make sure that your raised beds have either really good drainage, so drainage holes, or no bottom at all. And we'll talk more about square foot gardening and what you can do down the road in the spring when constructing your beds. But suffice it to say today that this is going to be our raised bed example. And what I've done is I've just layered the bottom with things that you can find in your own yard or a neighbor's yard. Sticks, sticks and stones may not break your bones, but they're really great in soil. So sticks, fresh leaves, pine cones. You could throw in some stones. There's some debate out there as to whether you want to, layer the bottom with a bunch of rock. I've had very good success with lava rock because it's draining. So that's an option, but I probably wouldn't do too much rock because that can also create a seal, and you don't want that. You're not trying to suffocate anything that's going on in here.
This is so interesting. So a lot of times if I'm, weeding or cleaning my garden or grass or lawn or like this would be trash.
Right. Good point.
This would go into a bag or
Yes.
get burned up or something along that line where it just gets pushed out into the gutter or something, like it just flows right through. And
Most people want to remove this from their lawns. And what I'm asking you to do is actually the opposite. Go ahead and hang on to this stuff if you can, because if you're a gardener, because this stuff is considered gold, it gets very, very expensive,
Wow.
and take it from me, year in and year out to buy new soil. I have heard other people say, oh, I just, scrap the old soil from last year and buy new bags. Well, that's pretty wasteful, and we really don't need to do that. Good, healthy soil is alive, which means we don't want to destroy it based on that alone. And, we want to keep improving our soil. And we can absolutely do that with the very things that, we're throwing away right now.
This is absolutely magical. Like, I don't know if you guys can comprehend the magnitude of what you just said. It does cost a lot to get these soils because we have tried to garden in our house, and in order to do a 5x5 little plot or 10x10 little plot, we actually dug up a about 10x10 area in our backyard, and we bought bags of these things,
Oh, I
and
did too in the
it was
beginning.
just it was expensive, obviously, and then there's nothing happens after the winter time, so that you get weed and you get all kind of stuff, and you have to. That's pretty cool. So what are you gonna do with this?
Okay, so I brought us some gloves. I don't know if you want to get involved here, but there you are. I don't typically use gloves myself, but what I brought was, this is just some soil from this past season. I grew some lettuces in this pot right here, and what am I going to do with it? Well, I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to recycle it just like I am with all the other materials here. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this. My preferred method is that you have a layer of brown material. So this is all material that, is rich in carbon. This is all going to break down and become soil. But what makes it break down and become soil are the nitrogenous ingredients that you will find in greens and basically kitchen scraps. So I have, and we'll pull these out in a minute, but banana peels, pineapple tops, lettuce leaves, cabbage leaves, grape stems, orange peels, other vegetable peels, skins of all kinds. What you don't want to put in here, and this is very, very, very important, and this is why some people who compost end up with rodents and other disasters. What you don't want to put in here are anything meat related, no byproducts of meat, no dairy. You don't want any human or pet waste. And I also would caution against breads, pastas, rices, and other grains because those are the things that attract the rats, mice, and
I thought putting in manure or
we're going to talk about manure. That'll be in a class down the road because there's a whole discussion about manure. Some manures are fine, other manures are not. You want well composted manure in the end. So manure is not a bad thing. Manure is a wonderful thing. It's a vitamin pill just like compost is, which is basically what we're doing.
Yeah, back in India where I grew up, I was really little when I moved here, but we used to collect the cow dung and then mix it up.
Oh yeah.
It was one of the most odd things, but at that point it was normal because everybody did it. And then we would, make it into a little paste and sometimes not just let it dry up and then, put it underneath or on top of rose plants or jasmine. And I mean, they all survived and they all were awesome.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, manure is a wonderful thing.
You want to show us that bowl again? What is that called?
Okay, so this one here?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just I had just potting soil that I had from this past season. Actually, we grew lettuce greens in here. And so it's now at the end of the season and a lot of people think, okay, what am I going to, I guess I'll just chuck it, right? No, you don't need to chuck it at all. I take my old potting soil to build new soil for next season.
What is this?
And here we have, this is pine straw. So I have 2 large white pines in my backyard. And every fall, we get this nice dumping of the needles. This material, this kind of material, it makes it wonderful for worms to live in. This will decompose slowly. And because it's creating kind of a matrix in the soil, it breaks it up. It'll keep the soil aerated. This also retains water, so it's good for moisture retention. It's not real high in nutrients, but that's okay because you want to remember that beyond nutrients, texture is so vitally important to healthy soil. If that texture isn't right, the little microorganisms can't live, and if they don't live, what they poop out is not going to feed your plants. So it's through their interaction with the nutrients that actually make the nutrients bioavailable to the plant.
No, that's so cool. So what are these 2 things?
All right, so just very quickly, this is obviously kitchen scraps. And just remember the golden rules. It's basically fruits and vegetables, no oils, no meats, no dairy. You can use eggshells. I would say that is about the only meat derivative or animal derivative type of product that I would put in here. And even with eggshells, I would make sure you crush them down. Anything that you can physically crush or break down is going to help to decompose what's in here a lot faster. But if you have 5 to 6 months for this to do that on its own, you don't need to break anything down. It'll do it on its own.
That's pretty cool.
This here is coconut coir, is what it's called. This is actually, picture a coconut at your local grocery store. And that hairy material on the shell of the coconut, that's what this is.
Mm-hmm.
This is very, very sustainable, which is why I like to use this. A lot of people will use peat, and peat is a wonderful, wonderful thing. However, there are very rare and endangered species that live near peat bogs. And so I try not to use peat whenever possible because I know it's disturbing those ecosystems. So I prefer to use coconut coir, and it's going to do the same thing as peat.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, you can see that this material is somewhat similar to, the pine straw.
Mm-hmm.
And again, because this is brown dead material, these are all carbon based. So you do what I will do over the winter months. In fact, I just instructed the kids today. Literally, I said, guys, I need you to collect all your banana peels, all your veggie salad scraps, whatever, and start incorporating them over the next few months right into the soil. Turn it in. You don't want this kind of stuff, this green, alive, nitrogenous material to be sitting on top because you will just attract flies and insects and everything else. But buried into the soil, these two types of materials will interact and produce this, this is what you want. And this is what this is going to look like at the end of the year. See how it's clumped, but I can easily break it. That's the texture you're looking for. So you can easily clump it, but it will also break easily as well. And you see how rich and dark that is? And if you were to smell this, it smells lovely. There's no foul smell to it at all. And so now for the fun part.
That looks, the word that comes to me is filled. But then there's another word that comes to me as tilled. It's not dirty, just to let you know. But can you explain to everybody what is tilled?
So these larger particles, stuff that falls from trees, combined with animal excrement, will produce something called tilth. Tilth is kind of the texture of your soil before it's fine like compost. So tilth meaning you're going to get some larger particles, right, and a tilth soil. So if you were to take a rake, for example, and really rake through this at the end of the year, well, I shouldn't say that, the beginning of the growing season, let's say you were to really rake this down, you're actually raking it to a fine tilth. Make sense? If you left it alone, it would be a little bit more crumbly, and tilth just is describing the texture of the plants and the medium that the plants are going to grow in. So you do want good tilth, meaning you don't want it too clumpy. You don't want it to look like your clay soil.
So it's a measure of the soil. It's like a consistency, quality of the soil that you want it to be.
Exactly.
And if it's not tilled, then what else can it be?
If it's not tilth, then it's going to be usually one of these other types of soils. Okay. It just doesn't have the texture that this does not have good tilth because it's too clumpy and unworkable.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. That's so interesting. So is there, in medicine we talk about testing things. Like we can say you don't have good energy, but that means nothing until I test you and see if there is, diabetes, hormones, whatever. Is there some type of test to know how much nitrogen or carbon or
yes.
How do you test soil?
Okay, so and this we'll provide these details in the PDF, but there's a couple of ways to do this, and let me qualify what I'm about to say, because you really don't need to test soil that, let's say you're buying from Whole Foods or online. I like, if you're going to buy soil, if you're going to go that route, just a quick note, I personally like OMRI certified. It's just an organic standard in the industry, and they will produce beautiful soils for you. So it's not like you have to do this. Mm-hmm. But for people who, want to be frugal, they want to recycle the materials that are on their property, this is a great way to do it. So when it comes to testing, if you're going to use materials right from your property and you just don't know, and especially new builds, renovated buildings where there's been a lot of lead-based paint issues as a result of that chipping, peeling paint that comes off of windows and then ends up in our soils. This would be a good reason to get your soil tested to make sure that it's not full of things like lead or mercury or aluminum or cadmium.
So there are companies who do that, or these are
Yes.
labs who test your soil.
So there's two ways to do it. You can get a simple test from Home Depot, Lowe's.
Okay, there are those available that are out there.
Yeah, and they're going to give you some generalities, pH, things of that nature. You can also contact your local extension, and there's one in just about every county here locally. So we've got one for Warren, Hamilton, and Claremont. You contact your local cooperative extension, and they'll send you the test kit. You take a sample of your soil, send it off, and they will come back with a full report. But they will test things like heavy metals and contaminants, everything to pH.
That's so interesting. So, one of the words that one of our listeners had asked us last week is, what is soil amendment? Or is there, that's the first time I've ever heard of this, but one of you guys asked this question, so I have it here, but can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, so soil amendments are things that we add to the soil to boost fertility, in a nutshell. The more fertile your soil is, the greater yields you're going to get, the fewer pests you'll have. You won't need to water as much. So it really pays to create a very, very fertile soil. And what's interesting is this guy, actually you had this book, and I'm like, I want to bond with it, but this is a really good beginner's book for this was actually an engineer who developed this program, but basically he figured out a way for people to grow at home without your home looking like a farm and without growing your crops in long, long rows. You can literally grow in very small spaces. And what he says is that soil amendments are actually unnecessary if you get the soil right out the gate.
And are amendments or something that you buy, or
some are, some aren't. For me, I would consider this to be a type of an amendment.
Okay.
Because this is actually going to acidify the soil a little bit. Doesn't have a huge impact, but it is going to change the soil a bit.
So basically, think of this like amendment is something that changes something. That's why we are amending the Constitution, right? I guess we need to do that in this day and age a lot. But, hint, hint, go vote. But this is what will change the soil. And we're amending the soil by adding one thing or another depending on the type of acidity we want.
And this is just our first real talk about soil. So we're going to get into the fine details as the year progresses. I'll be bringing in samples of like rock dust, which is great to add a lot of minerals to your soil. Things like worm castings, wonderful, because it provides such a great food source for the bugs that are in there. There's any number of lime. People will use lime, for example, to alkalize the soil. Let's say they get that soil test back and they learn that their soil is actually too acidic. You can sweeten the soil by adding lime or eggshells. We can also acidify the soil as well with things like coffee grinds, and there's a number of amendments that you can use to acidify soils. But pH is actually pretty simple to get right as long as you do this method.
That's pretty cool. That's really interesting. We have really good listeners. Sometimes they ask, they really want to know a lot of things from you. So they ask a few more questions. I'm just going to ask these questions because they're quite interesting. From medical perspective, I think about organic matter as my skin and all those things. But then we're talking about this is all organic matter. It's carbon. This is what our body's made out of, right? 96% of our body is made out of this kind of carbon. So in the world, the question was, what is organic matter and where do we source it from?
Okay, so organic matter again is it's something that's not man-made, and it has to have come from something living. So even though technically this is a dead thing, it came from something that was once alive. So it has to be alive. It has to be matter. So I would also say organic matter is just anything on your property that nature already is using to create soil. So that is your leaves, your pine cones, your sticks, your bark, all of the
Mm-hmm.
kitchen scraps that we collect. And this is just collecting in landfills. So my feeling is if I can keep as much out of the landfills as possible, then I've done a little bit. I've done my part.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
All right, two more questions. Where do we use organic matter? I guess this is the answer. So pay attention to this, right? So this is how you're going to reuse your organic matter. Some things will go to trash. Some things you're not going to use, but then others you can recycle it as much as you can. Now, the last question was, is there a method for layering organic matter on the soil or raised beds?
Yes.
Okay.
There are actually, I've probably lots of different methods, but the three most common are sheet, lasagna, and something called let me see if I can say this right, hugelkultur. It's a German term. And so I'll discuss like sheet or lasagna type layering. And all it is you're layering brown and green materials. That's why they call it lasagna gardening.
And that's what we're going to show in our session. So
yep.
let me pause right here. But thank you so much for joining us. We're going to show in our next video how are we going to layer this, and you're going to get to find out what exactly you need to do at home so that you can start planting and using this kind of a soil next March, because it's going to take some time to build this foundation, build the ground, build a little 2x2, 4x4 area in your balcony, maybe wherever that you choose to do this at. And once it takes a little bit of time, and you'll be able to get there by next March, and then you'll have an amazing summer with lots and lots of vegetables and fruits that you want to grow. So thank you so much for joining us. We have prayed for you. We have listened to your questions. Thank you so much for listening to them and asking and being diligent about them. We're going to do our best to answer all of these questions, as many as we can. And on every Friday, if you can join us, right? Friday mornings is when in our office we take our patients, we listen to their stories, we're concerned about them. We're concerned about the questions that you guys ask us. And if you have a story that you want us to send our positive vibes and our prayers to, just let us know. There are many, many of us who are joining in this prayer. And you may be at your home, we might be here, but we do it together. And with this collective effort, we're creating this field of positive energy. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, always call us, ask us, like, subscribe, do what you need to do with this channel, share. And we have a community where we have all these PDFs and all these other information that we share here in different documents. And you're welcome to join that community at aceintegrativehealth.com, or you can join it at acemyhealthcommunity.com. And it's a community that has all of us in it. And we put a lot more videos into the community, a lot more data, a lot more PDFs and documents that help you organize yourself and help you understand what we're doing and where you can get resources. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us, and click to the next video to see how we're layering things. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.